Dario Argento's second 1971 film, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, rounded out what would eventually become known as the Animal Trilogy. It saw both a continuation of what he had begun and a preview of what his films would become. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, what I think strikes me firstly about this film is its initial seeming sort of deviation away from his first two films on a stylistic level. So it is worth noting that I believe it was for this film that Dario Argento didn't want Ennio Morricone to do the music because I think he felt it was too somber and too maybe melancholy was Morricone's style. And it's really interesting because I think it's pretty obvious that Morricone is one of the great film composers of all time, maybe the greatest. And I think I'm not sure he's ever written a bad score, and certainly the scores that he wrote for the first two films are great, and this one is absolutely sensational. It might be the best of the initial three, but remarkably to think that when he shifted to Goblin for Deep Red and Suspiria, that they are some absolutely iconic themes as well, and I think in a lot of ways you can sense that there's a bit of a different vibe that he's going for a little bit. There is something slow and ponderous about his first two films, whereas the main theme for this film has that vibe again, and you can see perhaps why he wanted to escape from it, because in the opening credits, there's this sort of I don't know if you call it prog rock, but this sort of music that's coming from the main character Roberto's band that is very sort of upbeat, and it's sort of at odds with the tone of, well, it's completely at odds with the tone of Morricone's music, but it's interesting the way it sort of contrasts what we've seen, what we have seen previously, and what we also see in this movie from that perspective. What it does is it creates a sort of maybe not inconsistent tone, because I think what happens to an extent is it works out quite well. I think you might say that the theme music for the first two films that I've reviewed in the previous two podcasts, discussed in the previous two podcasts, I feel like it's theme music for the film, whereas I feel like Morricone's wonderful score for this film is more for a specific element of it. I think especially the way it's used in all its glory in the last scene, that there's something almost there's a vibe of it being like in the mind of a crazy person or something, right? It's a bit insane inducing or crazy inducing or something, right? And I'm not sure that that's the whole tone of the movie, but it's like when that music's around, you sort of feel like something's a bit off, right? So I'll just briefly compare the original, the opening scene, the opening credits in this movie to the A Bird with the Crystal Plumage, because it has this similar thing that happens in those credits where we sort of mix music in with different shots, and the music stops. So we have the music, we see the band, and then it'll stop and go to the shot of the title, and that interesting heart image that, to be honest, reminds me quite a bit of Suspiria, and it's got this weird energy, but then it's contrasted with taking the music away. So again, it's this uneasy sort of up and down tone. And I'll just make a humorous note of there's a scene where a soccer ball comes towards him in the credits. I think a child has lost it, and it's quite funny because the way he kicks it back sort of proves that this guy's not an Italian actor, Michael Brandon, because I can't imagine any Italian in the 1970s would kick a soccer ball that way. He definitely looked very much like an American, and I don't think soccer was a very big thing in America at the time. So I thought I'd just make note of that. So it's an energetic sort of start to the film. Roberto is, he's in a band. He seems to be sort of enjoying himself, but it also keeps interspersing his enjoyments of playing music and butchering soccer balls with these shots of this man, this mysterious man who is following him and watching him. And I think what's really sort of interesting about that is that these are very much the opening credits, and it's already putting in a bit of work, like plot-related work, before we've even exited the opening credits, which I think is actually quite effective, because before anything's actually had the opportunity to happen, we already feel like we know a little bit about this guy, that he's a musician, and that he's being followed. So, going past the opening credits now, I must say I really like this opening sequence. Argento really does have the ability to tell a lot of to give a lot of information, right at the start of his movies without it feeling contrived. He notices, Roberto notices this man, not necessarily watching him. I think he's facing the other way, but he's sort of around a corner and leaning on it, and he follows him to this theatre. And I think this whole sequence is, I really quite like it. I know some of it can seem a bit cheesy, like there are a lot of elements of these films that can seem cheesy, and maybe they are a bit, but the way that he sort of falls back and whatnot. But I mean, given as we find out soon, it's actually fake, we can get away with the cheese to some extent, I think, in this scene. But I mean, that mask is so damn creepy, right? That the person with the camera is wearing. I almost feel like this mask doesn't get a big enough run. Like, obviously in other films that the killers have masks, it's sort of almost the defining image of those characters. Whereas the killer, Nina, as I'm sure we all know, is rather inconsistent in her depiction, I suppose. I'm not sure if you could necessarily define what moments it is that she's meant to be wearing this mask. In a plot sense, it seems to be situations where she would otherwise perhaps be seen, I suppose. But it is worth making note of the not masculinity, but the boyishness of the mask. It looks like a boy, and I think that's very key. And what I do like about this film is its return to that sort of maybe not dichotomy, but maybe ambiguity within the relations between men and women. And I'm not sure that the whole thing is necessarily executed to perfection, but I think this is a very satisfactory explanation. I think one of the things that I enjoy about the Italian horror film in general is this sense that is the explanations, the kind of trauma that the killers often had to deal with in their childhood. Maybe the explanation of why it's Roberto, that he's a bit of a spitting image of her stepfather or father, is not that good. But in terms of it's a bit easy. But in terms of the actual motivations, I actually personally think it's a really, really good, really good thing. I think it's some of his more effective explanatory work. So we then sort of introduced, I suppose, to Roberto's wife, Nina, who is obviously going to attempt to kill him. And I think they have a maid, and so he's got this very nice house, right? And we later find out that it's because Nina's really rich, and this isn't something that's necessarily dwelt upon, but I think it falls into that theme of the male and female situation where he feels somewhat like a dominant force in the relationship, but he's not necessarily the breadwinner. I know he's in a band, but it doesn't feel like he's necessarily making a lot of money out of it. And to be frank, some of the music is sort of rather crap, so I can't imagine them selling a hell of a lot of copies. But it's an interesting vibe, because they have those real hipstery or hippie-ish friends, as that guy with this afro and the mustache who keeps telling sort of inappropriate stories. And I guess I'll just mention the story that he tells about the beheading in Saudi Arabia. This is an interesting concept. It's like there's that link to what happens at the end, and I think there's a point where Roberto talks. It might be to the private investigator of Rosia, but it's definitely someone who he talks about his dreams and how he feels like there might be premonitions. But I don't know. I feel like that's not fleshed out in a particularly satisfying way. Not that it is unsatisfying that this idea exists necessarily, but it's like, he's having dreams about beheadings, and then eventually Nina gets beheaded. It's a bit whatever, but I think we're all quite welcoming of beheadings in horror movies. I think they're one of the things that we live for, really. But what I think is really good about these scenes, there's a real vibe of like they feel like a dream, right? Because they are dreams, and you sort of introduce them in this really white way, very bright, and the people in the courtyard, if you want to call it that, slowly emerge, and just that setting, that little knife that goes into the back of the guy's neck or head area before the is it a machete or a sword type thing is being swung towards him. It's a very uncomfortable image, right? So it's really effective, but it's not necessarily woven into the plot in a perfect way. But at the same time, I think sometimes it is good to just have these kinds of horrific and scary things happening, I suppose, in these movies. So what I find I feel like the film doesn't go to a hell of a lot of effort to steer us away from the possibility that it's Nina, right? Because, and I feel like it happens more and more as the film goes on, that there's nothing really going for their relationship. There's a degree of love there at the start, and Nina seems genuinely upset, and Mimsy Farmer is a really good performance, I think, in this film. But she seems genuinely upset when he explains to her what's going on, even though she already knows what's going on. And Roberto explains to her that we can't go to the police because I've killed someone and all that. But that sort of sets the scene for really all their interactions in the film, right? Where Nina's desperately trying to get him to do something and he won't do it. Now, I think regardless of whether he's going to actually take her instructions on board or not, I think she is planning on killing him either way. But it is reflective of this theme of insignificance that she's been put into by the men in her life. I honestly think that she is a genuinely sympathetic character. And because I think what's effective in that way is that she's sympathetic already, and then the explanation at the end, I think, to an extent, makes her more sympathetic. And to be honest, by the end, I think we're pretty damn sick of the way Roberto's treated her. I don't feel like we want her to sort of hit him in a more dangerous place necessarily with those bullets. I don't necessarily want him to die or anything. But it wouldn't be the worst thing, right? Like, we don't like him that much. I don't think we're meant to like him that much. But yeah, nonetheless. So let's move on. The scene where he's sort of ambushed, where Roberto sort of, I believe there's some string or rope stuff put around his neck in his own home, and the killer is wearing the mask and all that and saying things. There's something really cool about the fact that Nina's in the house and he knows that she's in the house. Now, I just want to be clear here. I'm not actually totally sure that wasn't the creepy stalker guy. I wasn't exactly clear what was going on plot-wise, but nonetheless, the idea that Nina's in the house and right after this happens, he's going to go and maybe talk to her about it, and she's completely in on it. I think there's something really creepy about the idea that horror and that violence is coming from within his own home, and you really get that sense as well that he finds the pictures of him, in inverted commas, killing that guy in the house, and it's like there's a real sense that he. There is no safe place for him to be, right? Like he can't go home. He can't be at home and expect to feel comfortable there, which I think is really, really cool, So Just give me a sec here. He... In fact, yeah, I'll move on. I'll move on to I think it's the maid Amelia. And I do remember the first time I ever watched this film, thinking this is where, like, I was a bit unsure of it up until this moment, but I reckon that scene is absolutely sensational. And again, to say, as I have in the previous two podcasts, the actual kills in these initial films aren't necessarily the best, but his ability to create that sense of horror is just fantastic. And again, I'm sure there's a reason why Amelia is in the park, but there's something so effective about at the start. So she's sitting on that bench, and she's looking towards like a playground area, and there's parents there and there's kids there. There's no necessary sense that it's late in the day or something, but like, it just feels like it's afternoon, but it does seem to become night extraordinarily quickly, but it doesn't feel forced or fake, I think, because this scene's just shot so well. So she seems to be sort of daydreaming, and then suddenly everyone's gone home. Almost like a lot of times pass without her realising. Then there are those tunes. There's like music playing on some big PR system, and that stops, and that sort of indicates like, oh, it's time to go home. And then it cuts to a shot of some person closing this big gate on the park, and then so we feel like she's locked in, and well, I guess she is locked in, and then suddenly the soundtrack's like the wind is very loud. There's there's no one else around, but there's a sense that someone's watching, and pretty soon it's dark, and she's rushing through the park, and she knows that someone's watching her, or someone's following her / trying to kill her. And the way it just builds into the horror in this scene is really, really fantastic. You know, she finds herself in that between two hedges very close together, and she's trying to climb up them, and suddenly there's a big spider web near her head, and this is like I feel like we're watching some kind of Hammer horror film out of nowhere. Eventually she gets out of that situation and she screams out, and there's those people on the other side saying, I'll try to climb over, and the guy makes a horrible attempt at climbing over again. There's sort of impotent men unable to help the women. And again, I don't think we even really see her die at all. We just hear her scream. But overall, this is just an honestly fantastic scene overall. So then we see Nina's cousin Dahlia. She has come to stay, and this is so sort of bizarre. Like, the whole way all this unfolds is, Roberto doesn't like Dahlia apparently, and doesn't want her to stay for some reason, and he's all pouty and annoyed, but it's just sort of odd. Right? So obviously, look, we'll return to that momentarily, because I think it's one of the more confounding elements of this film. So we find out that it's Carlo Morosi is the name of the whatever he is, the guy, the stalker that's following Roberto at the start. We find out that he's still alive, and he's been rather annoyed by the by the situation. He says something about the thing with the cat. That wasn't good. I think we later find a cat that's been killed. That Roberto finds it. And he also refers to the murder, and he wants out of some agreement that he has with the killer. What I really think is an effective method to build that sense of like what a force the killer in this movie is, and I suspect it's used in other horror films as well. He's quite a sinister figure, this person, right? Up to that moment, I think up till the moment where we see him eating that spaghetti in that restaurant, we think he's dead. Well, there's no reason to think otherwise. And suddenly he appears again. But regardless, we find him quite a sinister, fearful character, right? Like his appearance and the way he's acting. But then Nina bashes him over the head to death. And by the way, that's a really, really effective scene, I think. It's just a great scene as she knocks him down initially and then, repeatedly pounds. And it's sort of like a POV shot from his perspective that is really, really cool. But to use this device to, as in film device, to establish just how powerful and fearful this killer is by them just disposing of someone else that we found relatively fearful in such an aggressive and dominant way. It's like, now we feel the real force of this killer. And to an extent, I feel like this is one of the more effective killers overall, in a sense, because do you ever get the impression or the feeling sometimes with Italian horror films, but probably horror films in general, that there's that meticulous nature that they have, and especially like Argento's films, for example, where they love having the shots of the hands and the gloves and the knives and them sort of organising things. And the kills all seem very planned and very meticulous. But then in the scene where it's revealed that they are them, where it's revealed who they are, suddenly they seem to be all over the place. And it's a little bit at odds with that. But I feel like the way things unfold in this film and then the revelation that it's Nina, I feel like I'm rather convinced that this Nina that we're seeing now could have been, like, it is rather consistent. So anyway, I thought that was probably worth mentioning, and I think partly because she's so like, yes, planned, but also just a little bit over the top, shall we say, in the method of disposing with Morosi here. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's consistent with the way she acts at the end of the movie. So I think that's pretty cool. I also just sort of like not the actual idea, but sort of the way they show his little retractable knife and the blood coming out. So then we get, again, and I referred to this in the previous podcast, but there's another gay caricature of a person in the private investigator Arosio, and this guy is so incredibly likable. But again, it's like, if you're going to be gay in these movies, you're like super gay, right? And to the point of it being a bit of a caricature and probably not an unfriendly one, just an over the top. This is our attempt at representation, but nonetheless, as I said, it's better to have some representation than none at all. But what I also find about this guy is that he's, to me, unbelievably likable, and there's a lot of sort of, as I mentioned, he does like his quirky characters to sort of, I think, balance out the intensity of his films a little bit, Argento. And there's a few of these. We've got that, probably too many actually. Like there's that weird looking mailman that is beaten up by Roberto at one point, and it's like I think the extent of the comedy that they're going for is a bit too much, because they've got the Professor and Godfrey or God, that it's like there's just a little bit too much of these sort of or too many of these wacky sort of characters that are a little bit hard to believe, but nonetheless. Of those, I think the most satisfying one is Orosio, because he actually has some, I guess, substance. I really like what his character becomes, and it's interesting because he just sort of appears for a portion of the film. And when he's there, he's in basically every scene, and then he dies, and then we move on. Maybe it's not the most effective writing or directing, but what it does do is, as a character who's very secondary to the film, is by focusing on him so much within that short time frame, is it really gets the opportunity, gives us the opportunity to really like him, and to be honest, he's actually a hell of a lot more likable than Roberto, so it's very, very what would you say, humorous the way he says, the odds the odds are on our side, or the odds are on my side. So why's that? It's like, well, I've investigated 84 cases, and I've never solved any of them, which there's something really, really funny about it. But again, it's sort of just this, there's a bit of a vibe of things just sort of happening. It's not clear to me exactly the point of including that kind of thing, other than just to insert a little bit of humor to everything. But nonetheless, I think when we hear that, we feel like pretty confident that this guy's he's gonna give us something, I think, and of course he does in the end. I'll just acknowledge that there's a scene not long before we see him. These flashbacks are really, really good. I just want to circle back to it just to or go back to it just in case I forget. There's a flashback, and there are multiple ones throughout the film to an unspecified place, and they're of an unspecified person. And in one of them, the quote is, "I wanted a son, not a weakling like you." And it's a point of view shot, and they're put into this sort of whitish, it's like, it's an institution, clearly, room, and it's square, and it has this brief spinning around scene, and it really is just super, super effective, I think. So again, I think some of this is a little bit simplistic, the way it's put into the film. These repeated flashbacks with quotes about this figure, this unspecified person, sort of hurling verbal abuse at their child for not being masculine enough or not being manly enough. It's simplistic, but at the same time, it is an effective and a simple way of getting across this idea of out of whack masculinity, whether it be within the character or specifically the attitude towards it from others, and that is really, really it's very key, obviously, to the actual revelations at the end of the film. And it's also very indicative of, the whole Argento thing, right? So we follow Orosio for quite a bit, right? He goes to the Villa Rapidi, the mental or psychiatric institution or facility, and he speaks to he speaks to a doctor about someone who was a patient. I don't think it's specified to us why he's there or why he's gone there, but I think the implication is that he's not talking about some vague thing. He's probably asked specifically about Nina, but obviously we can't know that because then it would give everything away. And we have these. I think just before that or after it, there's a montage of him doing some detective work, which is cool because he's introduced in that way and he's being excessively flamboyant and he's hitting on Roberto, and it's sort of like, why are you hiring this guy, right? He seems more interested in you than he does about investigating your problem. But he seems to really earn his place in the film and as an investigator in these scenes. And then I just find that scene where he's on the train and he is looking through the crowd of people to the presumably Nina. I've often looked at this and said, is she in there somewhere that we can see? I don't know. Like, is there something that indicate that sort of would give us the opportunity to see? I've never actually seen her, but I think that would be really cool if it were the case. But there's something really, really effective about this scene in that I don't know if people or actors train themselves in eye acting, but there's something really intense about Orosio's eyes in this scene. And in this scene, if he hadn't already, he becomes a very serious entity in our minds. And there's something about the framing of it. We know that whoever he's looking at is the killer. I think it's really, it's an extended scene. It happens for a while, and I sort of like the visual concept and even metaphorical concept of him being stuck in this very crowded train and this very crowded, just the idea of the mind and the physical space around you being crowded, because it indicates the difficulty in trying to get through everything, right, in order to uncover the mystery, both literally and metaphorically. And in the end, he has to sort of push through some people to get off the train to try to follow. So it is very, very sad when he dies. Actually, he gets, he follows Nina into the toilet and then, gets beaten over the head and injected with something, some kind of liquid. But the killer, Nina, obviously taunts him and says, congratulations, you were right. And it's very, very sad, but there's that aspect of I was right this time, I did it. He's achieved something. So good for him. 85th time lucky, but not necessarily, because ultimately, he doesn't actually get to, be rewarded with the fruits of his labour. So soon after, This is where I think the movie gets, I wouldn't say goes off the rails, pardon the train-related pun, but gets a little bit strange because there's a lot of stuff that, and this can probably be linked back again to the previous film with Anna and Giordani, the relationship that they have that is sort of incomplete. So the relationship in this film between Dalia, Nina's cousin, and Roberto, I mean, it is sort of complete in that Dalia ends up dying, but it's sort of, the idea of it to me isn't overly clear. So anyway, Dalia is looking at a photo or something, a photo that we don't really see, and notices a resemblance to, sees Roberto and notices a resemblance to someone else. That's obviously a revelation or helping us for the end. But that's not really the point of all this. Well, maybe all this is a distraction from that. So Nina leaves before this, and Dalia stays for some reason. But Nina leaving almost feels like maybe like a sort of final attempt for her to at least get Roberto to listen to her. Like, she seems very, very genuine, like please come with me. Like, she spends a lot of the movie crying and sort of being sad. And as I say, I'm pretty sure the plan was to kill him the whole time, but nonetheless, she still was quite desperate to actually make him, actually have some kind of sort of properly reciprocal relationship with him, I think, because there are a lot of these scenes where he's just never going to listen to anything she says, whether she's right or wrong. And it's a little frustrating, I think, because like even with the revelation that, you know, she's trying to kill him and that she's killed everyone else, it's still a bit like it does make him a little bit hard to, you know, hard to actually, I don't know. Hard to actually like him, I suppose. Can I just clarify? I've actually put things out of order slightly here. So the Dalia thing happens before Orozio's death. So after Nina leaves, so I'll jump back to that. So after Nina leaves, and Dalia's still there. And to keep in mind that up to this point, all we really know about Roberto's thoughts about Dalia is that he doesn't really like her, but we also know that Dalia is unbelievable looking, and that it's like, why else is she here if nothing's going to become of it? And so it's a bit stressed, and she's like, oh, you need a warm bath, and so I don't want a bath. And then next scene, he's just in the bath. It's so weird and sort of childish. And then, you know, Dalia's in there sort of, she's not exactly flirting with him, but she does start washing his back. And then Roberto's just a total sleazebag jerk, looking in a dress and in a blouse and trying to open it. And it's like, again, maybe it's just a reflection of the times, but there isn't real clarity for mine that Dalia is actually properly interested in, like, sleeping with him. in that moment. And, you know, he acts like an absolute jerk, but because she ends up reciprocating, it sort of like seems to justify it. And I don't know, it's like, I just find that a little bit uncomfortable to watch. And believe me, if you've listened to any of my other podcasts, you'll know that I'm not like some kind of woke star. I'm quite the opposite of that. But there's just something particularly uncomfortable about it. But nonetheless, you know, they have sex in the bath, and you know, Dahlia talks about how she really, really cares about Nina, but that she doesn't regret doing this. And it's I don't know, it's just a bit like, okay, you know, I can understand what Roberto was thinking, but if there is one fault of this scene, apart from it just being so odd, like even the sort of editing of it, it's got that sort of weird music, and it sort of cuts, you know, in and out of different shots. I think my criticism of it is like, the film has the opportunity and almost takes it to present Roberto as properly unlikable and link that back to the justification for why Nina wants to do bad things to him, because she's been mistreated by men. But the film doesn't exactly do that. The only real explanation is that she chose him because he looks heaps like the actual person that she hates, right? So it could have even been more effective if she'd actually not only chosen him, but sort of found out that he also deserved to not be murdered, but deserved to have some kind of repercussions. And he's acting in a way, you know, sleeping with her cousin, that could indeed justify some repercussions, but doesn't end up happening. So anyway, I'll jump back to where I was post Orosio, and look, I'm just going to acknowledge the line, or firstly even the concept of that scene where he meets Godfrey and the professor at this, I don't know, like a coffin convention or whatever. The line, "Let's face it, everyone has to die. It's a commercial necessity." I just find that a fantastic line. Both in and of itself, it's humorous, but and it's delivered by Godfrey or Bud Spencer, who I think is a rather famous Italian guy. But it's also, it feels self-reflexive to me. Like it's like there's a bit of like Argento saying, well, let's face it, if people aren't dying in this movie, people aren't going to go see it. So I sort of find that really, really cool. But I won't dwell on that scene. I also acknowledge the humour of the guy trying to sell a coffin to someone, and the guy's not happy because he's not comfortable in it. And the salesman says, you know, no one's ever come back. No one's ever made a complaint. So then after that, we go, there's this shot of Dahlia remembering the goading comments. So it's interesting because, and the goading flashback comments, right, about masculinity and not being enough of a man and all that kind of thing. Like, it's clearly implied that she is remembering them. And it's sort of odd because in that way, it would sort of indicate that she's the killer, but it doesn't seem to overly imply that. And also she's sort of killed not very long after this, but in a sense it probably actually reveals that Nina is, because being her cousin, she would have, if she's remembering those, then she would have had to have been in a position to actually hear them. So there's a good chance she was around her growing up, blah, blah, blah. It's, I don't know. I like Dahlia, right? And it is quite upsetting, I think, when she dies. But again, like, is it a missed opportunity? Like, is there any aspect of like, well, I'm going to kill you because you're my cousin and you've slept with my husband? I don't know. I wonder if that kind of thing could have actually been taken advantage of slightly more. Now, I'll just briefly sort of go into this this retina thing that they go with. Again, as I sort of alluded to on the previous podcast, I think there's definitely bunk science going on, but the way it's presented sort of makes me feel like these were ideas that were being bandied about at the time, and maybe people thought that this kind of thing was possible. So specifically within the movie, the idea that the last image you see before you die remains on your retinas, whatever the term is, for a few hours after you've died. And I think one of the absurd things about it is, it's like, oh, here's this new thing that happened and we're just going to try it out. Like, okay, why specifically now, and why the hell does it just work so conveniently? Of course, it does give us our wonderful title, Four Flies on Grey Velvet. But yeah, it's like, okay, we'll do that, I suppose. But I also think the problem with doing this is whether it was a sort of scientific pursuit at the time or not, or sort of a fantastical idea. The problem is it is clearly fantastical. And again, like, this isn't a film that feels very unrealistic, I think. So it's too much of a stretch, I think, from reality to do this. And also, like, because they don't really do a lot with it. Like, okay, we see the four flies, and it is crucial to the actual revelation, which is cool. But it's like, if you're going to do something so ambitious in a film, just a sort of brief explanation and, oh, we're going to do it, doesn't really seem to be doing it justice. Like, they don't really own it. Nonetheless, I think the actual image they take is cool. Like, I think the four flies, I think that's cool. I like the idea of it being blurred and all that. But it's so on its face ridiculous in a movie that otherwise most of the events within could happen quite easily. It was probably too much of a stretch for them to do this, I think. But, you know, we'll accept it because it gives us the great title, and as we know, there has to be a sort of largely unrelated to the overall events title, also with reference to some kind of animal or creature in it. So, yeah. So, I guess Roberto goes home and he sort of sits there. Waiting for the killer to show up. I think he's got like Bud and the professor. It's Bud Spencer, so as in who he plays, Godfrey, sort of keeping an eye out, and he's just waiting for the killer to show up, and we get the final Saudi dream, and so I think he's sort of dozed off on the couch, and it happens a couple times that we actually see the beheading this time. So obviously it's a sign of things to come. So, you know, he's waiting and then then Nina comes home, rushes in, and he's yelling at her, and he's telling her to go, just drive anywhere, just get away from here. And then the amulet with the fly comes out, and he realizes that she's the killer. Now, I'll probably actually just sort of say here that it would have been better to sort of maybe give a little bit more credence to sorry, not give more credit. Maybe actually have the person that's killed with the 4 flies on Grey Velvet scene should have, I think, been closer to the start. I think this is actually, again, it's a little bit of a failing of the previous film, that you don't get the full effect of these things by not drawing them out. So you could have anyone, one of the early people that died could just have the 4 flies on Grey Velvet thing. So it's something that we're thinking more about, because if they wanted that to be a really cool revelation, and I think they did, and I think to an extent it is sort of cool, we've only known, with the audience, we've only known I think for about 5 or 10 minutes about this whole, or maybe a little bit more, but not much, about this, the fly thing anyway. So I think it would have been better to do it earlier. And yeah, and like I'm thinking of, say, just the whole. Think of the opening scene in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, or even what happens with, I think it's Mark, is it David Hemmings in Deep Red, where it's like they set up the thing that's going to be the revelation right at the start, and everything else that's happening is happening around that. So it's much more circular and it's much more satisfying. So I think that was something that, you know, Argento probably didn't get completely right in this moment. But nonetheless, I think, as I alluded to earlier, that the explanation is pretty satisfying, and I think this scene in general is pretty satisfying partly because of the way that, or the fact that Nina's actions in this scene don't really seem inconsistent with her actions previously in the film. She isn't, the killings aren't as meticulous as we often see in Giallo and Argento films in general. So when we see her in this moment, I think we can translate this character to the kills that we've seen in the film and think, yeah, it's conceivable to me that this person did that. So, as I said, I really think this is a great scene. It's on the DVD that I have a couple actually, but on the one that I watched, there's this little sort of disclaimer early, not early, right at the start, that says that about 90 seconds of footage have been restored in this scene, and it's just with Italian voiceover and subtitles, so it's a bit sort of jumpy. I'm not sure what the process is there. Maybe it was not included in the English speaking cut, and therefore they never did the voiceover for it. Maybe something like that. So it does make it a little bit in and out. But you know, if you want to give it actually a bit of credit, it sort of adds to the craziness of it. Like the idea that she would just jump into speaking Italian in the middle of it, and then go back to English and then back to Italian. But you know, that's just a production reality. Her acting is sensational. She looks genuinely crazy. But, well, okay, so part of her explanation, she says, you know, he asks her why, and she says, because you're so much like him. Did you know he brought me up as a boy? He felt cheated because he had a girl. Now, again, to sort of prove my anti-woke credentials, genuinely, when I was watching this, as in not the first time I saw it, but when I was watching all these films for this, I thought, geez, that can be applied to like modern culture, right? Like, I don't want to delve too deeply into this, but I had to bring it up. It's like, it's the inverse of what happened. Like, now we have the opposite error to this, where the more extreme, or the side of transgenderism that is particularly dangerous is when people are so open to it that they start convincing their own children that they're a different gender, or you start introducing the idea that gender is malleable to like a 2-year-old, you know, like you can convince a 2-year-old that Santa Claus is real. And I watched this scene and I thought the wokesters would be going, oh, would they just be getting absolutely angry. But I thought it's just the opposite of what you guys do, right? But nonetheless, I think it's probably worth reflecting on when I was the first ever time that I watched this film. I initially thought, interesting cast choice, Mimsy Farmer, right? But not just casting, but even the way that she's made to look, right? She has a slightly androgynous vibe anyway, but I think they really extend that. They never shoot her in a way to sort of emphasize her femininity, and she has a boyish haircut, especially in the context of this time where, like, Roberta has longer hair than her, and she is made to look rather boyish. But what's interesting about that is she's just sort of boyish, and it's not really addressed, and it's just there. So as I say, when I first watched it, that was an interesting casting choice, like compared to the other choices that we've seen in his films and the films that I'd seen later from him that were similar. And then obviously this is the reason, right? It's like she's been raised as a boy, and I honestly think this is such a and abused for not being masculine enough, for not being man enough, and I think part of her dialogue in this scene is that he got angry because when he criticized her or when he beat her, she didn't react like a man would. And it's really, I think it's a really important part of the horror film, but very much the Giallo film, and very, very much the Argento film, and that is this idea that horror emanates from, and horrific action emanates from a troubled mind. And see, this is why I think the wokesters tried to cancel J.K. Rowling, because of some tweets, but also there was a bit of controversy around a book that I think no one had read, that one of the characters dressed up in women's clothing and they're a man or something like that. And it's, this is a controversial thing to say, but I think it's quite a reasonable standard to put into a film, not as an attempt to overall demonize transgender people, but if a traditional explanation for a killer in a horror movie is that there's some kind of psychological torment or trauma going on there, that if there is gender ambiguity going on in their head, or broad, troubled depictions of gender and sexuality that is right through Argento's films, that it makes sense that horror emanates from that, would you say, confusion or lack of certainty, or just general bad relationship with it, right? Like there's some kind of hatred of people within Nina that emanates from the abusive upbringing that she had, and it emanates from specifically gender-related trauma. Perhaps one thing that is a little bit clumsy about that in this movie is that I think we would all accept the sort of iconic image of the giallo film is the woman getting murdered, right, in excessive ways, right, and that's one of the criticisms of them. Whether that's right or wrong, I would probably say it's not. I would probably say it is wrong. The criticism, that is. But the explanation really would probably make more sense if she was killing lots of men, right? But that's not the expectation of a giallo film. So, nonetheless, she does kill a couple of men, or she. How many does she kill? At least one. The investigator that she deals with pretty brutally, and obviously the whole thing is about trying to kill Roberto. But I think it's a very, very logical. It's logical, especially at a time when, society was trying to get its head around homosexuality, and transgenderism, according to society, was barely a thing at all. It makes sense that in that context and in that time, people with gender confusion would be or gender confusion in general would be a sort of go-to plot device in order to explain the motivations of a killer. If you don't like the representation of that, then bad luck, I suppose. So then comes the final image of the film, and here I'll return to the discussions about Morricone and the way I think the dichotomy, I suppose, between the kinds of music that the two kinds of music that really appear in this film, I think works, whether it's deliberate or accidental, because as I said earlier, I think the unbelievable, just sober, creepy, echoey, it is a beautiful theme that Morricone made for this film, and it's used, I think most of the theme happens in this actual last scene. So, I guess I'll describe it first. Godfrey appears as she's sort of tormenting Roberto. She shoots him a couple of times, then he appears, and then Nina runs out. She jumps in her car, she drives away, and then in excruciating slow motion, or excruciatingly slow motion, she crashes into the back of a truck and slowly gets decapitated. Now, in this process, right, the theme plays, and it is the theme to me of insanity, of sadness, right? I don't know if it was written specifically with Nina in mind, but if you think of the idea of an abused psychiatric patient, a child psychiatric patient, that sense of being alone, that sense of struggling with your mental health, this theme, and it's so hard to describe exactly why, but I think anyone who appreciates the theme will probably agree with what I'm saying. It just perfectly represents that. And it's why, in some ways, this particular theme, albeit I think overall the music that Morricone did for The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, I think there's actually overall an hour of it. Also, overall, I think that's possibly his best work for Argento in this time period. This specific theme is the best one, I think. So it's a bit of a crescendo of the initial Morricone music era in the Animal trilogy era of Argento, but I think it almost comes together in a bit of a perfect storm, right? Because Argento wanted not to have Morricone do it for this film, and there's a lot of I don't know, maybe Morricone wrote all the other stuff as well, from like the band, but that feels so much more up the alley of like what happens in Deep Red with Goblin, with this real vibrant, bouncy type of music, right? It's a totally different vibe, and I think the reason that he didn't want him was because he wanted to get more towards that tone, but he already had a contract with him for 3 films or something like that. So instead, it's a bit half-half, but in many ways, I think though the other music is more out of the tone of this film than Morricone's music, I think. That's my sort of feeling towards it. But like literally having your main character in a band, it's like I think we're moving towards something else, a different kind of art that we're depicting here. I'm glad that the contract required Morricone to be involved in this film, because I think the specific theme that he came up with is just beautifully reflective of the character of Nina. And as I say, I'm not sure it was necessarily defined for her, but we do get the theme in all its glory in her pretty epic death scene in all its glory. So we come full circle with, well, if you could call it a circle, with the decapitation thing. As I think I alluded to earlier, I don't think the way this is constructed is perfect, because I don't really think that Roberto's had a premonition as such, but it did have an excuse for those really, effective and scary Saudi Arabia courtyard scenes. But nonetheless, we've had this decapitation theme for a while, and then Nina gets decapitated, and then the car blows up. So it's an epic way to end the film. I don't mind these endings where we're sort of, like in both of these last 2 films, it's like all the stuff happens and then here's a final image and, all right, go home now. I think it worked a little bit in the previous film because for the most part, things were wrapped up in the way they needed to be. But in my mind, I feel like we need some kind of reaction from Roberto here. Like, obviously that wouldn't be as good an ending, so who knows, maybe it would have been better if you get more of a reaction before we then have the car explosion scene. But you can't have everything, but yeah, it's still overall a pretty effective moment, in my opinion, and of course overall a very effective film. Not that I'm here necessarily to judge the quality of these films, and as I say, I'm certainly not going to be giving star ratings or anything like that, but I think that it is overall I think it's a pretty effective film. I love the acting. I don't mind the story, and the music is sensational. So that about wraps up episode 3 of the Italian Horror Guy podcast. I've now covered the Animal trilogy in pretty close detail, I'd say. And episode 4 is going to be Deep Red, which is my favourite of all of Argento's films. So I'll try not to salivate too much while I'm talking about it, because I think a lot of these themes that I've talked about really come to the fore in that film. And yeah, that episode will be out over the next probably less than 24 hours, I'd say. And then I'll be doing, within that same time period, a Suspiria episode, which will round out this rather compressed series of Argento films that I've been looking at. So thanks very much again for joining me, and please join me for future episodes, and If you haven't done it, go back and listen to the other episodes as well. I'll give a little plug to my horror/film science podcast once again. I think plenty of the stuff that I'm talking about there will be up the alley of some people who are interested in the topics here. But other than that, once again, thanks very much for joining me. And I look forward to recording more episodes and for you to join me once again soon.